Chapter 2. Imagery and the Media. In 19th century America. The bloodhound. As it relates to dog breeds, form often defines function. A Jack Russell Terrier could easily be trained to be an attack dog, as a Newfoundland dog could easily be trained to be a guide dog for the blind. Both breeds have the innate canine intelligence and behaviors that would allow them to be trained for these functions. But for obvious reasons, the Jack Russell Terrier would not be taken as seriously, nor could perform the task as efficiently, as some of the larger breeds. The Newfoundland might perform his assigned function with reasonable satisfaction, yet his large size might make some tasks cumbersome, and the long coat might make this breed overheated in situations another breed may tolerate better. This realizes tie-in that certain physical traits, form, will assist in certain tasks, function, has resulted in the creation and maintenance of breeds of dogs. Humans have artificially manipulated dogs to be excessively small or excessively large, to be long-haired or short-haired, as well as a host of other physical traits that are either useful for a particular function or simply because we find them aesthetically appealing. Besides manipulating a particular appearance in a breed to assist in a specialized function, humans have also artificially selected to enhance or subdue some natural canine behaviors to assist in performing a particular function. We have created hundreds of different dog breeds, a fascinating mixture of sizes, colors, shapes, and specialized skills. While the physical characteristics of a particular breed of dog cannot be changed once it is born, behavioral characteristics can still very much be influenced by humans. In other words, once the Newfoundland puppy is born, little can be done to change the predetermined breed appearance, but its behavioral traits are still subject to influence, control and the manipulation of humans. So while a dog may come with a set of breed blueprints to excel at a particular function, humans are in essence architects, and can either use those blueprints to build on those behaviors or ignore the blueprints and build/train the dog for a different function. Indeed, dogs rarely perform or are expected to excel at the function for which their individual breed was originally created. Not even in the 1800s and early 1900s, when dogs were used much more as working animals, were most dogs expected to perform the function associated with their breed. Many people owned bloodhounds in the late 1800s, and most of these dogs were never used to track a scent. The Newfoundland, a breed developed to aid fishermen and rescue drowning victims, also became very popular in the late 1800s, yet many of these dogs never saw a fisherman or entered a body of water. Besides not performing the function the breed was developed for, some dogs may excel at a function associated with a completely different breed. In 1907 there was a case of a Newfoundland saving his master from a raging bull, and in 1906, a case of a bulldog save a young boy from drowning. Clearly, dogs can and were obtained and used for purposes other than the original breed design. Part of the wonder of dog breeds is this potential to perform specialized tasks along with the ability to function outside of a breed-designed behavior. During the second half of the 19th century, bloodhounds were frequently reported as the breed most responsible for severe and fatal attacks on humans. In only a 10-state area, there were at least 38 severe or fatal attacks by bloodhounds reported in the news media from 1855 to 1910. The fact that bloodhounds figure predominantly in cases of extreme canine aggression in the later part of the 19th century, and the fact that fatalities associated with this breed are virtually non-existent in the 20th century, offers a unique opportunity to examine the critical issues that suggest breed-based aggression. While this presents a unique opportunity to study the factors within a breed that may contribute to canine aggression, it also presents the same type of inherent problem seen in more modern times when attempting to label aggressive behavior as a breed-specific trait. The first obstacle encountered when trying to determine breed involvement in cases of aggression is in ascertaining the correct breed identification. While this may not seem so difficult a task, in reality, it is hugely problematic and presents a host of possibilities for misidentification and erroneous conclusions. The case of bloodhounds' involvement in attacks on humans in the 19th century demonstrates that before any conclusions about breed-specific behavior can be drawn, there needs to be an examination of the reliability of breed identification and an understanding of the complexities involved in the relationship between owners and dogs. In the 1800s, the term bloodhound was applied loosely. Newspaper accounts from the period are found describing dogs involved in severe or fatal attacks as Cuban bloodhound, Spanish bloodhound, Florida bloodhound, Southern bloodhound, Negro bloodhound, Texas bloodhound, Russian bloodhound, Siberian bloodhound, British bloodhound, St. Hubert's bloodhound, bloodhound mix, true bloodhound, valuable bloodhound, and, simply, bloodhound. It quickly becomes apparent that all these references to bloodhounds cannot possibly be describing a single or uniform breed of dog. For most people today, the term bloodhound easily conjures up an image of a huge, lumbering dog with long cars, a sad countenance, and black and tan markings. This dog is the breed known as the British or St. Hubert's bloodhound. The first St. Hubert's bloodhound was registered in 1885, in the newly formed American Kennel Club. Undoubtedly, the dog we view as a bloodhound today was also the standard for the breed description a century ago. This type was also referred to as the true bloodhound, and the admirers and breeders of these dogs were constantly found defending their breed against a barrage of imposters, myths, and bad press. In the 1800s, bloodhound was still a description more of function than of breed, and a number of very dissimilar dogs were all grouped together in this broad category. The Cuban bloodhound. The Cuban bloodhound is also known as the Southern, Spanish, Negro or Florida bloodhound. To the true bloodhound aficionado, no insult to their breed was more objectionable than to attribute the behaviors of a Cuban bloodhound to those of the true, or St. Hubert's bloodhound. And their objections were not without merit, for the breed known as the Cuban bloodhound was considered a particularly fierce and aggressive animal, and the function of these dogs usually involved cruelty and subjugation. The true origins and parentage of the Cuban bloodhound was speculative even at the time they existed. An 1888 article in the Denton Journal attempted to explain to readers the difference between the types of bloodhounds, taking great pains to disavow any relationship between the British, St. Hubert's, bloodhound and the other varieties. The author claimed the Cuban bloodhound to be a combination of the deerhound, the ferocious mastiff, and Russian, Siberian, greyhound. Another article in 1891 claimed the Cuban bloodhound to be produced by a cross between a mastiff and a pointer. The 1913 edition of Webster's Dictionary defines bloodhound as a breed of large and powerful dogs, with long, smooth, and pendulous ears, and remarkable for acuteness of smell. It is employed to recover game or prey which has escaped wounded from a hunter, and for tracking criminals. Formerly it was used for pursuing runaway slaves. Other varieties of dog are often used for the same purpose and go by the same name. The Cuban bloodhound is said to be a variety of the mastiff. The 1945 edition of the Observer's Book of Dogs describes the Cuban bloodhound as a large and ferocious Dogue de Bordeaux/bloodhound cross, bred for hunting fugitive slaves in Cuba and Florida. A modern-day, well-researched description lists the Cuban bloodhound to be a combination of English Mastiffs, Deutsche Doges, French Mastiffs, St. Hubert bloodhounds, English Greyhounds and a variety of the Old British Bulldogs. But while there was much dispute about the origins of this breed, there was little dispute about the function of these dogs. They were used not only to track, but also to harass and injure their human quarry. The reputation and origins of aggressive behavior in these animals resulted from their use by the Spanish conquistadors to subjugate and decimate the native populations in the New World. An account from Bartolomé de las Casas, 1474–1566, a Spanish missionary and historian, described some of the atrocities practiced by the Spaniards against the natives in the Caribbean and Central America during early colonial times. They entered into towns and villages, sparing neither children nor old men and women. They ripped their bellies and cut them to pieces. They tried to flee from these men. Men who were empty of all pity, behaving like savages. The evil men had even taught their hounds, fierce dogs, to tear natives to pieces at first sight. It is interesting to note that 5 centuries ago, Bartolomé de las Casas recognized that the dogs were taught to behave so ferociously. He understood that the savagery shown by these dogs towards the natives was an extension of the savagery of their masters. In the United States, the purchase and use of Cuban-bred bloodhounds by the Van Buren administration to assist in the removal of the Seminole Indians from their tribal lands drew bitter criticism from the public and from rival politicians. The war against the Seminoles who refused to be expelled from Florida was becoming longer and more costly with each passing year, 1835 to 1842, and when authorization was given in 1840 to purchase 33 Cuban bloodhounds, there was a public outrage. Though the government insisted the dogs were to be used only to ferret out the Indians, this was hardly believable, given the reputation and history of cruelty associated with this breed. The Cuban bloodhound is also the breed associated with the hunting down of fugitive slaves in the years before the Civil War, and during the Civil War there are references made to both Confederate and Union regiments using Cuban bloodhounds to hunt down enemy soldiers. So while there can be debate over which breeds of dog contributed to the genetic makeup of the Cuban bloodhound, it is really of little significance. The behaviors of these animals had little to do with breed genetics and everything to do with the depravity of their masters. There is also little doubt that the ferocity and aggressiveness of these dogs was a direct result of human manipulation. Many of these dogs were not merely encouraged to behave ferociously but were cruelly forced to behave this way. While the Spanish conquistadors were known to brutalize their dogs in order to force them to attack and devour Indians, this was not a phenomenon exclusive to that era. American history is replete with examples of brutal treatment towards dogs and humans. In a speech given in Taunton, England, on September 1, 1846, Frederick Douglass, the famed 19th-century African-American abolitionist, orator and author, described a process used to train bloodhounds to pursue Negro slaves. Slaves frequently escape from bondage, and live in the woods. Sometimes they are absent 8 or 9 months without being discovered. They are hunted with dogs, kept for the purpose, and regularly trained. Enmity is instilled into the bloodhounds by these means. A master causes a slave to tie up the dog and beat it unmercifully. He then sends the slave away and bids him climb a tree, after which he unties the dog, puts him upon the track of the man and encourages him to pursue it until he discovers the slave. Sometimes, in hunting Negroes, if the owners are not present to call off the dogs, the slaves are torn in pieces. Clearly the owners of these dogs understood how this abusive training would foster aggression. As is often the nature of man, cruelty begets cruelty, as the case of a freed Negro slave beating a bloodhound demonstrates. Also demonstrated is that consumption of copious amounts of alcohol can inspire some to behave with reckless cruelty towards dogs. Moses Spratt, a Negro, owns and works a small farm at Fairview. Before the war, Spratt was a slave in Virginia. He came north after emancipation, bringing with him a pair of southern bloodhounds of the kind that were formerly used in hunting fugitive slaves. With these he went into the business of breeding bloodhounds. He always had a large stock of the animals on hand which he keeps chained to kennels in the yard. Wednesday night Spratt had a party of friends at the house and liquor was passed around so liberally that they all got drunk. About midnight Spratt went out to the yard and the dogs began to growl. He spoke to them, but his voice being husky with liquor they failed to recognize it and growled the more. In his drunken recklessness Spratt picked up a stick and struck Pomp, one of the most ferocious of the animals. The dog sprang at him and the chain snapping, the infuriated beast fastened his teeth in Spratt's throat. In the desperate struggle that ensued he was thrown to the ground, falling near the kennel of another dog. That dog also attacked him. Spratt's cries brought his companions to his assistance, but before they could rescue him he was almost torn to pieces. New York Times, June 12, 1880. This case may also be the closest to an authenticated case of a fatality related to a true Cuban bloodhound, as the breed, function and origin of these dogs are described. It is unquestioned that the Cuban bloodhound bore little resemblance to the British variety of bloodhound, but this dog was considered a bloodhound nonetheless since it fit the functional description of bloodhound, i.e., a dog used to track a quarry by scent, or a hunter of blood. St. Hubert's/British Bloodhound or true bloodhounds. This breed was viewed as the true bloodhound in the latter 1800s and is the standard that we recognize today. The history of the breed can be traced back centuries, beginning in Europe and then becoming associated almost exclusively as a British import. This breed is known, first and foremost, for its ability to follow a scent and was used to track everything from stags and boar to sheep rustlers and criminals. The handlers and breeders of these dogs took great pride in declaring their breed to be a gentle and noble dog and were constantly defending the reputation of the bloodhound from the widely held belief that they were a fierce and savage animal. No dog involved in a fatality was ever specifically identified as a British or St. Hubert's bloodhound. Occasionally, there were reports of a valuable bloodhound belonging to a wealthy or prominent individual involved in a serious attack. This is as close as we can come to identifying an attack by a St. Hubert's bloodhound. Though bloodhounds were reported to be very popular in the late 1800s, there is little doubt that most of these dogs were not true bloodhounds, as a St. Hubert's or British bloodhound was clearly a valuable and expensive animal and not within the financial grasp of most people. The case previously discussed of the bloodhounds killing a burglary suspect they were tracking may be a case of true bloodhounds, since these dogs were owned by professionals, worked exclusively as tracking dogs, and were identified by the authorities as bloodhounds. There is no indication that these dogs were trained to perform any task other than tracking, as it was specifically noted that the dogs were not released to attack the suspect, but had broken free from their handler. Though it may be speculated that the dogs involved in this fatality were indeed St. Hubert's bloodhounds, it is far from a factual conclusion. And so we find, despite the numerous reports of bloodhound-related attacks and fatalities, there is no documented case where a St. Hubert/British or true bloodhound was ever positively identified. Siberian or Russian bloodhound. The Siberian or Russian bloodhound bore little to no resemblance to the St. Hubert's or British variety. The Siberian bloodhound was reported to be a massive animal and, like the Cuban bloodhound, along with being a scent hound, these dogs were created, manipulated and encouraged by humans to behave aggressively towards other humans. It is impossible to expect dogs to behave reasonably when human nature is such that we behave so wantonly, recklessly and cruelly, as the following 1880 account demonstrates. In the winter of 1880, a brutal exhibition was staged in St. Louis, where a professional prize fighter was matched against a Siberian bloodhound. In attendance at an old stable where the fight took place were an ex-police chief, an ex-judge, a physician, and 3 members of the House of Delegates. Though the newspapers that covered this appalling display condemned the event, they nevertheless used a lot of ink in describing it, blow by blow. The fight is finally described as ending when the prize fighter, Patsy Brennan, caught the dog by the neck and kicked the life out of him. The few accounts where we find Siberian bloodhounds attacking individuals in the United States seem relatively mild and restrained compared to the ferocity that was encouraged and the brutal treatment many of these dogs received. Here again, we find a breed used extensively as guard dogs attacking the wrong people because dogs often fail to differentiate between legitimate persons and trespassers. The following Lost Clues situation for a Siberian bloodhound took place in 1882 in New York City. The son of a policeman was walking a huge Siberian bloodhound on a cord. When approached by the owner of a varnishing company, the merchant wished to purchase the dog to guard his factory. The dog was sold for $5 and promptly put to use. Shortly thereafter, an employee showed up one Sunday night to set up the ovens for the next day. The bloodhound attacked the man and the dog was shot the next morning for his troubles. While there was a spate of reported attacks by Siberian bloodhounds in the 1880s, it is highly doubtful if these dogs were indeed purebred Siberian bloodhounds. The fact that in the previous account the dog was sold for $5 indicates that this was probably not a valuable, purebred dog. In comparison, there was a reported attack by a bloodhound on a man riding a bicycle in Babylon, New York. The dog was described as a $500 prize bloodhound, belonging to Malcolm W. Ford. There are no documented cases of a genuine Russian or Siberian bloodhound involved in a fatal attack in the United States. However, in 1906, on the northwest Russian border with Europe, there came the report of a peasant killed by bloodhounds near the border cross, ing. The border guards kept 4 large hounds as watchdogs and one night in mid-November the dogs tore away from the guards and ran into the neighboring forest. Minutes later, screams were heard and the guards rushed to find the dogs had killed a man and chased his 13-year-old son into a tree. The boy had been severely bitten also, but explained to the guards that he and his father were not smugglers or attempting to leave the country but were trying to avoid paying tax at the customs by going through the woods and around the border station. Here again, we have dogs that, although prized for aggression towards humans, still functioned as tracking or scent dogs, which makes the designation, bloodhound, technically correct. Bloodhound. How is it that the bloodhound came to have such a fierce and negative public image in the late 1800s and early 1900s? A number of factors coincided to create a public image or perception about the behavior of bloodhounds that was to last more than half a century. And the perception still lingers 100 years later, as one today can easily imagine a pack of bay ing hounds pursuing a frightened and desperate fugitive. The danger implied in this imagery is not foremost from the humans in pursuit, but in being overrun and attacked by the dogs. How accurate this scenario was hardly mattered. What percentage of bloodhounds in the 19th century attacked their quarry also mattered little. An image was created in the collective consciousness of the public that would not easily be shaken loose. The factors that combine to create this image are: 1. A broad-based grouping of dogs listed as one breed/type. 2. Breed/type dog used in functions associated with aggression. 3. Media portrayal of breed as aggressive. 4. Increased popularity of breed and consequent increase in number of substandard owners. The first two factors have been discussed. There was a wide variety of breed/types of dogs that were all grouped under the breed, bloodhound, and the functions of these dogs often required them to be protection dogs, attack dogs, or tracking dogs. Bloodhound-type dogs were also popular at the time, but as we shall see, popularity is often spawned by a negative media image, and so these dogs became even more sought after when their dangerous image increased. Fatal animal attack stories have a type of macabre appeal, and it was not uncommon for newspapers in the mid-19th century to report dog attacks in graphic detail. Dogs involved in attacks were described by breed and temperament, and other circumstances considered relevant or of interest were noted. Dogs were very commonly reported as a savage bloodhound, or a fierce mastiff, or a valuable bulldog. At times, the injuries these dogs inflicted on their victims was reported in shockingly descriptive terms. All these circumstances and details were included to add substance and interest to a story. A headline reading, "Child attacked by fierce Siberian bloodhound," sounds much more menacing and interesting than the headline, "Child bitten by dog." Bloodhounds in the latter part of the 1800s were considered menacing animals, so it is not surprising to find them identified, correctly or incorrectly, in newspaper accounts of dog attacks. But the overwhelming perception of bloodhounds as fierce came not from actual reports of attacks, but rather from a fictional visual impression. In 1851, Harriet Beecher Stowe's novel Uncle Tom's Cabin began the first of 40 installments published in the abolitionist periodical, The National Era. On March 20, 1852, Uncle Tom's Cabin was released in book form and was enormously successful, selling over 300,000 copies the first year, becoming the best-selling American novel of the 19th century. Before the turn of the century, it is estimated that over 2 million people read this dramatic portrayal of American slavery. Though the references to bloodhounds in Stowe's novel were scant and may have contributed only nominally to the negative image of this breed, it was the stage productions or Tom shows which most negatively influenced the reputation of the bloodhound. Stage dramatizations of fictional works were not properly regulated by copyright laws at the time, and within a year of the publication of Uncle Tom's Cabin, a number of stage productions based on the novel were already in progress. The success of these productions cannot be overstated. It is estimated that over 3 million people viewed some form of stage production based on the novel. In American theaters, one version or another of Uncle Tom's Cabin was being staged continuously for nearly 79 years, 1852 to 1930. Some of these plays remained faithful to Stowe's plot, but many of these productions were little more than minstrel shows, loosely based on the novel but with grossly exaggerated caricatures of African Americans and full of melodrama. Producers of these shows quickly noticed an intense and emotional reaction from the audience to one scene in particular, that of the escaped slave Eliza, baby in arms, fleeing barefoot across the frozen Ohio River from a pack of pursuing bloodhounds. The dramatic impact this scene had on the audience was not lost on producers, and they quickly capitalized on this imagery. The bloodhound pursuit of Eliza became the dramatic highpoint of many of the Tom shows. By 1880 it was noted that no production of Uncle Tom's Cabin was complete without a pack of bloodhounds, and even the poorest of wandering troupes kept a pack of dogs to play out this dramatic scene. In addition to the on-stage attention given to this scene, many playbills and posters promoting the stage productions began featuring the bloodhound pursuit with, of course, all the dogs looking suitably menacing and vicious. Many of these playbills touted their dogs to be fierce Siberian bloodhounds. The probability of all the troops touring the country in the 1890s having purebred Russian/Siberian bloodhounds or any purebred bloodhound is practically nil. While it is certainly possible that some of these traveling shows may have had true Siberian bloodhounds, as there were breeding facilities that supplied some of the larger productions with purebred dogs, all evidence indicates that purebred bloodhounds, of any variety, would have been the exception and not the rule. But this ploy was successful in promoting and selling the show, as borne out by the reviews and editorials written by newspaper staff and the viewing public. One viewer wrote, "How the barking of these dogs behind the scenes used to make us catch our breath. That alone was worth the price of admission." Producers, always looking to expand on a commodity, began to use bloodhounds as sidewalk props in front of opera houses and theaters to promote and draw attention to the upcoming performance. A review of the Nevada Theater describes the atmosphere that surrounded many of these events. As soon as the doors were thrown open, the body of the house was soon filled up, and at 8 o'clock many went away on account of not being able to hardly find standing room. The street exhibition of the bloodhounds worked people up to the highest pitch, and if some of the people had been compelled to sell some of their already scant wardrobe, they would have done so just to see the bloodhounds perform. Nevada State Journal, Saturday, April 22, 1882. In addition to sidewalk exhibitions, elaborate parades were often staged on the afternoon of the show. The parades were a popular attraction and included a brass band, actors march in dress costume and, of course, a pack of bloodhounds. The following review of a performance of Uncle Tom's Cabin at the Ming Opera House in Helena, Montana, provides us with an invaluable example of how mood, imagery and drama can create an enduring perception or belief that will often become fixed in the public's mind. Perhaps the most interesting scene in the whole piece, or at least the most stirring, is the one in which the bloodhounds, for in number big and terrible, are in pursuit of Eliza and her child. And where they are seen following the fugitives across the drifting cake ice on the Ohio River and close upon them, the interest becomes intense. Indeed, so far as the brutes are concerned, there is no acting, for true to their own ferocious instincts their thirst for blood is evidenced by their savage baying and eagerness to get at the prey. Sometimes, too, the beasts have been known, in their eagerness, to break loose from the restraining leash and to leap upon the fleeing ones with savage fury. This, however, seldom happens, for great care is exercised to guard against such accidents, for the consequences might be terrible. But, however risky the introduction of bloodhounds on the stage may be to the people in the play, they cannot be dispensed with, for in these days Uncle Tom's Cabin without them would not satisfy the public. Daily Helena Independent, August 8, 1882. This review is enlightening on a number of levels. It describes not only the immediate entertainment, but also the formation of lasting impressions. The reviewer describes the use and staging of bloodhounds to create an image, to sell tickets and dramatize a play. It also shows how the audience and reviewers alike bought rather easily and fervently into an obvious and deliberately manipulated portrayal of bloodhounds. For a drama to be entertaining it needs villains, monsters or frightening obstacles to overcome. Being chased by a pack of baying, fierce bloodhounds tapped into a primal fear humans have of predators and was therefore great entertainment. One can't help but point out that, despite the insistence of the reviewer that bloodhounds have a ferocious instinct, and that it was risky for the actors to have these dogs on the set, many times the show managers would solicit the young boys of the town to serve as dog walkers at the parade before the show. These boys would then be given free tickets to the show for helping to lead these ferocious bloodhounds in the parade. But reasoning often needs to be suspended for entertainment, and Tom shows were great entertainment. By 1879, approximately 50 Tom shows were on the road, and by the 1890s there were between 400 and 500 Tom shows touring the country. There can be no doubt that this type of media hype had a tremendous influence on the public's perception as to the nature and disposition of the bloodhound. And as is often the case with the perverse nature of humans, for every person who feared a bloodhound, there seemed to be a person who sought this type of dog out for precisely that reason. An inescapable part of human nature is the need for some people to increase their sense of power or influence by obtaining things that serve to intimidate, frighten, or impress others. And there is no question that dogs can empower their owners by intimidating others. When the media portrays a particular breed as vicious, there is an immediate increase in the number of substandard owners of that breed. There was a direct correlation between the popularization of bloodhounds as fierce and an increase in their population among sub-standard owners, and therefore an increase in bloodhound attacks in the later part of the 1800s. Remember, by 1880, it was declared that no Tom show was complete without a pack of menacing bloodhounds. No small coincidence that the highest number of severe and fatal attacks by bloodhounds occurred during the decade to follow, 1880 to 1889, with 18 severe/fatal attacks in this decade in only a 10-state area, see Appendix A. Three factors are at work here: the media's attention and diligence in reporting and identifying specific breed attacks, the fictional use of bloodhounds as fierce, and the subsequent effect this had on increasing the popularity of this breed with poor quality or abusive owners. Evidence of an increase in poor quality owners is found in an increase in the number of reports of cruel acts associated with this breed. Cruelty against animals has never been considered particularly unusual or newsworthy, so to see reports of these incidents in the newspapers during this decade, 1880 to 1889, indicates a change in the degree or amount of cruelty. A few examples of deliberate acts of cruelty with and against bloodhounds in this decade include: 1882 men are arrested for unchaining a large bloodhound and inciting the dog to attack a homeless youth. The boy was severely bitten and taken to New York hospital. 1880 owner matches Siberian bloodhound against prize-fighters for entertainment in St. Louis. After a long battle, the dog is finally kicked to death by prize fighter. 1880 man breeding bloodhounds in New Jersey is gravely injured by the dogs when in a drunken stupor he starts to beat the chained dogs with a piece of wood. 1888 man arrested for cruelty when walking his bloodhound in New York City. He allows the dog to attack and terribly injure a small black and tan dog named Jip. Bail was set at $100 for cruelty to animals, as he made no attempt to stop his dog from mauling the small dog. 1889 man arrested in Milford, Connecticut, for ordering his bloodhound to attack and kill another man trespassing on this property. These incidents were newsworthy because they were not the run-of-the-mill type of abuse and violence regularly seen with animals. Bloodhound attacks became so frequent and so frequently expected that even some in the media could not help but comment on the "art becomes reality" aspect of bloodhound attacks in the late 1800s. In 1898, a New York Times article called a bloodhound attack on a woman in New York City an impromptu open-air Uncle Tom's Cabin performance. While the New York Times article was a deliberate mixing of fact and fiction, this was almost certainly the exception, as most people and other media sources had a much more difficult time separating fact from fiction when it came to bloodhounds. Clearly the media hype influenced the reputation of the bloodhound among the general public. A few fanciers of the breed understood the dynamics and made attempts to educate the public about the true nature of the bloodhound. Perhaps the most insightful summary of the bloodhound dilemma was given in 1892. When the following editorial was printed. I have heard it said that Mrs. Stowe, in her Uncle Tom's Cabin, did much toward bringing upon the bloodhound his disrepute. To see if this were so I read over Mrs. Stowe's book recently and was surprised to find that she only once alluded to bloodhounds in all her highly colored narrative, and never a single time brought them on the scene. She had other objects in view without going out of her way to malign a family of dogs. But those who dramatized Mrs. Stowe's story used the bloodhound with great realistic effect, and none of the wandering troupes which have played this drama has been so poor that it has not had a pack of dogs. But I have never known a troupe to have a pack of real bloodhounds. Instead they have mongrels of various kinds, but always mongrels that looked savage and bloodthirsty. The bloodhound is not only not savage, but does not look so. On the contrary, he is amiable in disposition and has a singularly dignified and benevolent expression. The Daily News, April 8, 1892. But any reasoning or insight fell on deaf ears, as the public was interested in being entertained, not educated. And these dogs did entertain, so much so that we may venture to say the dogs outacted all other Tom show performers. The canine actors gave such credible performances that a half-century of viewers were thoroughly convinced that bloodhounds were a fierce and savage breed of dog. The recognition of any bloodhound characteristics in a mixed-breed dog was usually all the identification needed to label the dog a bloodhound or part bloodhound. The term bloodhound was used for dogs that were clearly not purebred, but may have shown any traits that could be attributed to this breed. Once the dog could be recognized as having any bloodhound characteristic, this appeared to be sufficient identification and there was no further attempt to determine what other breeds contributed to the genetic makeup of the dog. We find an example of this with the previously discussed case of Camp Sumter and the court-martial transcript of Commandant Henry Wurz. The United States government's War Department findings of the court in Specification No. 11 list the dogs used by the Confederate Army at Andersonville Prison as ferocious and bloodthirsty animals, called bloodhounds. There is no evidence to indicate that these dogs were the true or St. Hubert's bloodhound or the breed we now recognize as a bloodhound. By all accounts the dogs at Andersonville prison were a mixed lot, perhaps part bloodhound and part unknown. Here also we find that the term bloodhound was not used so much to identify breed but to identify function, i.e., tracking or hunting down of escaped Union soldiers. In addition to all the different types or varieties of bloodhounds, and mixes thereof, there were also outright impostors. An 1855 report of court proceedings in New York City lists the complaints made by two separate individuals for the injuries they received after being attacked by dogs, along with a recounting of the injuries inflicted on the victims. The following report was given. Mr. O'Connor made a complaint yesterday before Justice Piercy, of having been attacked in his yard by a large yellow dog belonging to a baker named Schaefer. German bakers and rumsellers are almost without exception, provided with ferocious brutes resembling bloodhounds. It is obvious that any attempt to sort out which dogs were true bloodhounds, by either breed or function, or to attempt to classify the behavior of any of these dogs by breed would be an exercise in futility. Not only is it impossible to determine individual breeds, but it is also irrelevant. The behavior of these bloodhound-type dogs was either the direct result of human encouragement for aggressiveness or the direct result of humans failing to control or use reasonable care with these animals. Unfortunately, none of the true aficionados of the bloodhound, who so ardently defended their reputation in the 1800s, lived to witness the vindication of the breed they so admired. During the height of the breed's popularity, the voices of the true admirers of the bloodhound were lost in a clamor of rumors and hysteria. The public could not or cared not to see beyond the media-hyped image of the breed and recognized that the extreme behaviors of a small number of dogs were the direct result of the cruel use and mismanagement of these dogs by violent and abusive owners. However, those who defended the true bloodhound so fervently were guilty of the same stereotyping of which they complained so loudly. Their claim was that the behaviors of the Cuban bloodhounds and other bloodhound impostors had tarnished the reputation and prejudiced the public against their breed. Their defense of the bloodhound often became, "It is not our British hounds that behave so ferociously, it is the fierce Cuban bloodhound, mistaken for our dogs, that has brought disrepute to the breed." After 33 Cuban bloodhounds were shipped to Florida in 1840 to aid in the capture of the Seminole Indians, 11 of them were taken by the Army to Gary's Ferry on Black Creek, located about 30 miles southwest of Jacksonville. The dogs were being trained to hunt their new quarry, Seminole Indians, and were being worked in field trials. The arrival of these dogs from Cuba and their subsequent use by the Army was a politically charged and newsworthy event. As such, a correspondent from the Savannah, Georgian visited Garces Ferry in March 1840 to report on the use of the bloodhounds by the Army and dryly observed, 11 of these Florida bloodhounds, alias Cuba curs, are now at this post, feasting upon their 6 pounds of fresh beef per day. As to their ferocity, it is all humbug a child may fondle with them. They have been more grossly misrepresented than any set of animals in the world, the Army not excepted. Cuban bloodhound, Siberian bloodhound, British bloodhound, it matters little, for when these breeds left the hands of those looking for a vicious tracking, attack, or guard dog, severe and fatal attacks by these breeds virtually disappeared from newspaper reports. As owners looking for a new intimidation dog turned their attentions in the early 20th century towards the bulldog and German shepherd, the bloodhound population stabilized and bloodhound ownership largely returned to the true admirers of the breed. This scenario would repeat itself over the next century, As certain breeds became increasingly popular in negative functions, and subsequently more popular with substandard owners, incidents of aggression within the breed would increase. When breed popularity decreases with sub-standard owners and returns into the hands of more serious enthusiasts, incidents of aggression decrease.